Hello ladies and gentlemen, as usual, every Let's Not Meet story that is about to be read today is purported to be true by the authors on Let's Not Meet. Each of the stories will be linked in the description so you can actually decipher for yourself fact from fiction. Some of the content and subject matter we'll be covering today will be disturbing, and most, if not all of the subject matter covered today will not be appropriate for all audiences. If subjects of rape, violence, murder, and pedophilia will disturb you, then I highly recommend that your only course of action is to click off the video. But for the rest of you who is willing to stay, sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and prepare to be scared. This is new Let's Not Meet Stories. Let's begin.
As a kid, I lived in a pretty typical suburban neighborhood in a ranch-style house. My bedroom was at the front corner of the home, with a window that faced the street and a window that faced the house next door. I was only 11 or 12 at the time, and I shared the room with my younger sister. We had bunk beds, and I liked to sleep on the bottom bunk. From the position of my bed, I could see through the window that looked out at the street. I woke up one night to a thud at my front window. I was immediately on edge. I was always a paranoid kid. Knowing full well that I wouldn't sleep, I laid there, petrified. It seemed like hours, but what was likely a few minutes later, a man's face appeared through the crack in my curtain. I can see it so clearly in my mind, even to this day. I saw the shadow of his hands through my thin curtain, cupped around his face, in what I'm assuming was his attempt to see in the window. His eyes, nose, and mouth were completely clear through the crack. I cried there for a few minutes, unable to move, while he shifted a few times trying to see more clearly into my bedroom. I finally got the courage to slip out of my bed as quickly and quietly as I could, and ran into my parents' room to wake up my dad. At first, my father tried to attribute the noise to the large lilac bush at the corner of the house, of which the branches would occasionally tap on my window when it was breezy and the bush was overgrown. I cried and told him about the man. When he woke up all the way, he realized what I was saying. He leapt from his bed and ran outside. The man was nowhere in sight. My dad told me it must have been a nightmare, that the window would be too tall for anyone to look in anyways, and he ushered me back to my room. The next morning, we realized a planter pot had been pulled over from the front porch to underneath my front window to be stood on. A piece of the concrete window frame was broken off, and we could clearly see the place where someone's forehead and nose had come into contact with the window. So, to the man at the window from my childhood, let's not meet.
One-eyed stranger being creepy on two kids. This is my first time writing on Reddit, and first of all, I'm not a native English speaker, so I apologize in advance for any grammar issues that you may encounter. I used to live in a pretty new subdivision/neighborhood in the city. There were still unoccupied houses, and in my country and city, you can still see young kids playing on the streets without any, if at all, supervision. This happened in 2004. I was talking to my mother. She was in the living room watching some old pictures, and I was close to the main window looking at the street. We have a very big window in the front of the house that is covered by some very big opaque curtains, so in the day you can see outside, but it's very difficult to see from the outside. I saw two kids, a boy and a little girl, playing on a bicycle. They were laughing and suddenly stopped. I think that's what caught my attention, so I casually moved the curtains a little, and I saw a stranger that had one cloudy eye talking to the kids. He had short blonde tinted hair in the shape of what seemed to be spikes, a sports white t-shirt and jeans. He was also on a bicycle too, and he was talking to the children. I don't exactly know why I thought the worst of that situation, but I paid more attention to what he was saying and what he was asking the kids to do. It was something about his puppy. He said that his puppy was lost, and he has, and I quote, a wiener dog. But then I saw his zipper go down, and he was opening his legs to the children. That's when I quickly barged outside and started running in his direction in a very quick and fast manner. That's when he rapidly said thanks to the children and started to advance on his bike, moving as fast as I'd ever seen a grown man on a bike do. I ran to him and I shouted at him that I saw what he was doing and I was gonna kill him. That's the first thing I thought. I suffered from abuse when I was just a kid, so I absolutely exploded on such a man. I opened the front gate and ran shoeless in the Brunema pants and shirt that I was wearing as fast as I physically could. I took a pebble from the floor and I think I threw it and I hit his back. He was on his bike, so he clearly escaped. I called the police, and then I ran through all the neighborhoods looking for him for the next half hour or so. I felt so much hate. I wanted to destroy him. However, he escaped. The police didn't find him, and they arrived many minutes later, so that didn't help. I never saw him again afterwards, and I hope he stays the hell away from me. Because if I ever see him doing that, I don't think I'll let him go off as easy. I now own a car, and a weapon. So, creepy, one-eyed man, let's not meet again.
At the time of this story, I was around 6 or 7 in the early 2000s. Growing up, my family all lived very close together, or actually together in one house. My aunt and 2 cousins lived with my grandparents about a mile away from me. Both of my parents worked, so I spent most of my days there, as my aunt also ran a daycare. One of my cousins, Emily, was with me in our game room playing Nintendo, Duck Hunter if I remember correctly. All of the other kids had gone home, and my mom was expected to pick me up soon. Some other backstory. Our family had a mechanic / handyman, Steve, since before I can remember, and they still use him today, even though he's a total crock and never really fixes anything. He more so just duct tapes anything that's broken. While we were playing games, the landline rang and Emily answered it as she was the older kid at 10. She asked who it was, but she didn't tell me what they said. Then they must have asked who was with her because she said I was, and for some reason gave my age. She handed me the phone. The man on the line said hello, and I said hi back. He asked if I knew who he was, and I replied, "You sound like Steve." Steve was always hanging around the house just waiting for things to break so he could get paid to fix it. Steve, the man on the phone, said I was right. He told me to go to the bathroom and to lock myself inside. Being a stupid 6-year-old and believing I was talking to an adult I knew, I did it. What comes next is still a bit of a blur. My mother had arrived right as I went into the bathroom and found out what I was doing from Emily. Steve told me to unlock the window that was above the toilet, and I saw a shadow through the distorted glass. My mom pounded on the door, yelling as the shadow disappeared and a trash can under the window outside fell over. I let my mom in and started to wonder what all the fuss was about. When I remembered this story years later and asked my mom about it, she told me that Steve never called, and that there were several kidnappings of little girls in town around the same time as this incident.
Hammer or axe, pick your faith. This is the scariest episode from my childhood. It took place back in 1991 when I was only 8 years old. I lived in a village in the Norwegian countryside with my parents and my 2 older brothers. There weren't many other kids around us for us to play with, so we oftentimes just stuck together despite the age difference. In fact, I was only 8 years old and my brothers were 10 and 12 respectively. It was a safe neighborhood, and we were outdoorsy types of children, so it was fine for us just to return home and eat, then go back out into the woods and play, or go fishing in the lake that was also by the woods. In the autumn of 1991, my oldest brother dared us to sneak through the hedge into an abandoned property that was located close by. We had always thought of it as a sort of haunted house, but really, it was just an old house where a man who, well, started a village brick factory once lived. No one had lived there for ages, and the paint was starting to peel off, and several windows were broken. Our parents would tell us simply never to go there, and the reason, of course, is that they feared that we would get hurt playing in there. but we always thought it was because, again, it was haunted. You know, something straight out of Nightmare on Elm Street, if you will. But that day, we dared to walk around the garden, or what you would want to call it, and it had now a dried-up pond and an old well among several old drying fruits and trees and even tools in an old shed. It looked as though someone had just walked out one day and never returned, leaving everything as it was. We soon came to think of it as a garden, or really as our own garden. And after that day, we played there all the time. We would climb the trees, we'd use the tools to build things. It was great, it was our own secret playground. We suspected that people in the village had seen us, because soon our parents would ask us if we had gone there despite it being strictly forbidden, which of course we would deny, but someone must have complained. We were rather loud and simply untamed children. Until one day, it was in November, and I remember it since it was days before my birthday. It was a damp and rainy day, and we weren't really in the mood for playing outside, but our mom had chased us out of the house so she could clean in peace, and we weren't allowed to come back in until at least several hours later, so we decided to try to open the old cellar. I'm not sure, well, what the word is in English for these kinds of cellars, but imagine if you had like a hatch that opened almost horizontally into the ground. Then a few steps that led you down into a, well, dingy old basement type thing with stone and earth for the floor. It used to store vegetables and that type of thing, but now it was empty. After all of us climbed down there to have a look, we had a plan to write our names at the inside of the cellar and kind of mark it as our own. Suddenly, the hatch slammed above us and the cellar became completely dark. I started screaming, and my older brothers tried to open the hatch, and when my older brother, Sandre, tried to push the hatch open, he saw a man holding a small axe. "Come out! Come on, open the fucking thing! Trespassing little assholes!" The voice would growl, and the axe came close to opening the hatch. "Hell no!" Sandre would shout back, and then slam the hatch shut from the inside. "Alright, you know what? I know you're all in there, all three of you little shits. Does your mommy know where you are? Does she? I bet she doesn't. No one will look for you." We soon heard him dropping an axe and starting to move around. It was something else. Soon we realized he had taken out a hammer, and before we knew it, he had started to nail the hatch closed. I threw myself at the hatch, determined to get out, but the moment that the hatch opened a tiny bit, he reached for his axe. "Come on now. Come out. It's really a better choice. It must be awfully dark and damp down there. Are you afraid of the dark? Go on, let your brother out." He laughed, and we could hear that he was a little drunk. My other brother, Emil, was pleading with the man just to simply let us go, promising that we'd never return, but his words fell on deaf ears. Rain started to fall really heavily now, and we could hear thunder on the outside. The drunk man with the hammer was cursing and moving around outside, clearly bothered by the bad weather. "I might come out to let you out one day, or maybe I'll butcher all three of you," he whispered through the wooden doors as he hammered the hatch shut. We were too terrified to do much of anything, but Sandre told us to keep calm and would be okay. He would just surely come back to scare us, or something. The dark was compact inside the cellar, and it was cold and damp. After a long while's silence from the man outside, we started to wonder if he had left. Sandre decided that we could count to 100, and then try to get out. We counted loudly, and then we used our hands to find a hatch. It was definitely nailed shut, but Sandre told us to feel for some stone walls or for some loose stones, and we did, cutting our palms up on sharp edges, and eventually we did find one after many bloodied hands later. And surprisingly, it was easy to move from its place. The cellar was old and had not been tended to for ages, and the rainy climate of the Norwegian coast side had left the wooden doors rather soft with age. The hardest thing was to reach up into the cellar, but it was built in such a way that it was almost impossible to get a forward motion going in order to break the wood. But fueled by panic and adrenaline, we broke the lower half open. Being closer to the ground, it was softer and easier to tear apart. We started digging the earth with our hands, creating small openings. And being the smallest, my brothers pushed me out of the cellar. I could see that the man was indeed gone. My brothers are too big to fit through the small opening, and Sandre said that I would have to go out and get the hammer to get the hatch open. I was absolutely petrified that that man would come back with the axe, and I would have to run, leaving my brothers to die. Or stay and be slaughtered. At 8 years old, I had no doubt that that would have happened. I got the hammer, but I couldn't get the nails out, so I used the hammer to simply break the hatch into pieces. Soon, we were all there, running for dear life, across the garden and back into our own home, where our mom threw a fit at the state of our own clothing and hands, and determined to know how we've been beaten up. We all said nothing, and we lied, unsure what to say. We never went back there again, and we never even looked that way. The man with the axe? I had no idea who he was or where he came from. I wonder if he was a drifter living in the abandoned house, not wanting noisy kids to disturb the peace. This is by far the most fearful episode of my life, and we never told anyone about it. But every year, when Sandre and Emil and I would reunite at our family home for Christmas, we'd like to ask if there was any news about any old ghosts down in the street. Did anyone move in there yet, or anything really? But of course, we never really heard anything. So, creepy man from that weird house, let's not meet again.
It's early November. Cold, rainy, around midnight. My fiance and I like taking spontaneous late-night drives. We typically start out on one of the main roads within our city and keep following it until we hit the next town. Sometimes our drives last hours. The layout of my county and surrounding counties is a little bit bizarre. All of the cities and towns are isolated by large spreads of woods and country. I live in a relatively large college town, but a half-hour drive in one direction can land you stranded on jagged, unmarked gravel roads in the middle of nowhere, or in small, weird villages that no one really knows about. To be honest, it's actually pretty exciting, and that's why we do it so much. So, it was midnight, and we were nearly lost. Willa, my fiance, was poking around on my phone trying to figure out what road we were on. We were on a mud path in a pit of country framed by small towns that we've never heard of. Flory, Wennica, and Tell. There were no other cars on the road. It was rainy and misty, and the headlights on my car weren't doing a damn thing. There were strands of trees and brush on either side of the road, and we were heading north. She told me that she thinks we're going to run into Rye Road, which is a straight shot to Wennica. We made our way down the mud road for around half an hour and never hit it. We've always had fun on these sort of drives. However, this was one of the first times we were really on edge. Willa said we should have found Rye Road by now, and asked me if we passed it without noticing. I asked nervously if we should turn around, but she didn't think we could without backing up into a tree or a ditch. I was driving a Mazda, and it had an awfully wide turn. She was biting her nails as she scrolled around on Google Maps. 10 minutes passed, and we were finally able to see a little black road snaking up a hill, branching off the road we were on. I quickly turned into it. Twigs and branches were raking the doors and windows of the car. When we completed the climb up the little road, we found ourselves in a wide paved clearing with a house at the back of it, tucked into the thick woods. Willa didn't miss a beat and started hissing for me to turn around. Our headlights lighted up the entire property, which was in major disrepair. No lights, windows shattered, siding and shingles were shredded. The yard was littered with scraps and trash, barrels, car parts, tools, hundreds of glass bottles, branches, slabs of concrete, rocks. Near the driveway there was a nasty old Chevy pickup. It looked like the house was sitting on top of all of it. Every inch of the property was entangled in nets of ivy and weeds. Willa pointed out little moving shadows and glowing spots around the yard. There were dozens of cats around, and they were all looking at us with their eyes glimmering from the headlights. I almost pissed myself when a walnut-sized rock darted out of the brush and popped against a windshield. It fractured the glass. Willa screamed and grabbed my arm. She was whimpering. "Denny, what was that? Oh my god, Den, what happened?" The rain was pouring in black streams down the trees, over the house and across the pavement. All of the blood ran from my face. After a few seconds, a man stumbled out of the brushes and weeds, and he was carrying a fucking shovel. He was completely swallowed in a big dirty navy coat and had a beard. Then a screen door on the house opened and all of the cats scattered. A tall, thin, spidery woman crawled out onto the porch. She had long, wild grey hair. She was just up high enough on the porch that the headlights didn't reach her eyes. She wiped her unusually dark hands on her skirt and stared at us. Willa was screaming and crying and slapping the door lock repeatedly. I threw the car into reverse, rolling over cinder blocks and branches, and quickly went back down the road. After Willa stopped crying and there was some distance between us and the house, I started to relax. However, when we got out of the woods and hit a long, straight stretch of road, I began to notice headlights behind us. I got a stomachache when I noticed the car was mimicking all of our turns into different roads. After nearly half an hour of being pursued, we finally reached Flory and pulled into a gas station where we were visited by a few other people. I watched as the vehicle passed. It was the same nasty Chevy truck that we saw at the house. They stalked us all the way into the next town. We waited until we saw the truck disappear down the road before we got out. We got some food and asked for directions. On the way home, I was looking at the rear view mirror more than I was at the road. When we finally got back early in the morning, my teeth didn't stop chattering until I fell asleep. So, creepy shovel guy and dirty hand cat witch, let's not meet. Ever again.
The police officer was a fucking pedophile. So this is my first story here. And I want to talk about someone else who was in my life that turned out to be a fucking horrible person. Just to let you know, I'm 23 now, and this started when I was 9 years old. I'm going to start by saying he never did any of this to me, but I was living at his house at the time. Backstory. When I was a kid, both my mom and my dad were both alcoholics, and they got into physical fights almost every day. Me and my sister, being protective of my mother, we would try to attack my dad when he would hurt her. Even though I was only 9 and my sister was only 14, it never really ended well. He just simply beat us too. Cops were always called until the day he attacked all of us and got arrested for the last time. That's where we met Steve. He was a responding officer to a domestic call, and right off the bat, he and my mom had an attraction. And sooner or later, they started dating. Even though it was barely a month after my father got arrested. They started talking every day, started dating, and a normal relationship had just bloomed. I thought he was the nicest guy I'd ever met, and he'd buy us gifts and take us to places, and do anything to really make us happy. They dated for maybe close to a year and a half, and then they broke up. And I remember not long after, my mom told me something that made my skin crawl. She told me during the time they were dating, he'd came over there and went upstairs to see what he was doing, and she caught him in my sister's room sniffing her underpants. She never broke it off because she was the type of person that always wanted to feel needed. Even if it put me and my sister in danger, I blame it on the alcohol. He always tried to stay in me and my mom's life, and even though she started dating other men. June 15th, 2007, when I was 15 years old, my mom passed away. She had a brain aneurysm and was put on life support for 2 days before we could say goodbye. Behold, Steve showed up to the hospital to say goodbye. It was very nice of him, but I didn't know what he knew. She passed away the next day, and since then I've been put in foster care. The time it happened, I was placed in a teen psych ward in the same hospital for about a month and a half on suicide watch. Nobody in my family came to visit, but Steve came every single day. He would take me out if they would let him, and bought new pool cues and ping pong paddles for all the kids. He was always there at the fucking orphanage thing. I don't know. When I was let out of foster care, they let me move into his house. Now let me say this, and this is where it really gets fucked up. 1 week before I got let out was my birthday, so they let me have a weekend to visit for 2 days away from the hospital. As a gift, he bought me a brand new Mac laptop, a brand new cell phone, headphones, and all that jazz. I was excited to see everything set up over the weekend, download my free music, and get a program called Limeware. I'm sure most remember it. So I went to Steve's computer, and since he had the program to download new music and transfer onto my Mac, that's where I went. That's when his history came up. It was all videos of child porn, and they were titled 4-year-old tied up and gagged and 3-year-old gangbanged. I freaked. I knew what it was, and I knew where. I said nothing. I was tired of being placed in a foster home and to going to foster home for 5 years, so I said nothing. I was actually scared as fuck, and I don't know. And I won't lie, it was pretty fucking scary. I was there for 5 months until I went to his new computer to download some more music. I guess it slipped my mind at that second to what he had caused, and I never really thought of it until new videos came up, and I got terrified. He'd never done anything to me, but I started realizing that he was grooming me, buying me thousands of dollars worth of gifts within those short few months. I'm also going to point out that he retired from being a police officer after 25 years, and he was working odd and strange jobs after. I had a hospice worker who would visit every few weeks or so since my mom passed, and he would make sure that I was okay. I finally let it slip, and I told her what I found, and the next day I was taken into a new foster home. Months and months of statements later, he got charged with child pornography, and they found hundreds of images and hundreds of videos onto his computer. He was sentenced to 9 months. I never talked to him since, but I've been following the media. A year after he got caught, he was arrested again for more pornography and assault with a deadly weapon. Turns out he'd sexually assaulted and attacked the nurse who would come in and check in on his 87-year-old stepmom, and he also lived with us. After the first case came out, another girl came forward to finally tell her story. He abused her, and back in the 90s, he groomed himself to get closer to the mother. Then got close to the daughter and abused her. It shook me because it all sounded so familiar. She said it was because I came forward that she finally had the courage to stand up and come out against him. I feel that was the biggest win out of all of this, and I feel blessed I was able to help her come forward. I honestly don't know how much time he got for that, but not long after I searched his name again, and he's now suing the police force here for being too aggressive with him and tackling him in his driveway. He has, and I quote, a bad back. Yeah, right. I haven't heard anything since, but to this day, I feel blessed that I didn't attempt to, stay with him. I don't know if he ever thought about it, but I know he's a sick person. Just to throw it out there, his defense in court was, I had the video so I could find the children, help him. Which was a good case, I guess, but I don't know. I will leave below in the description a few articles from this case from when I first found him. Thank you guys for sticking with me through this story. As I finished typing this, I decided to Google his name one more time. Apparently he's been found not guilty for hurting this poor child. And I find this sick.
So I was around 16 or 17 years old when this happened. I used to work in a grocery store in what you might consider a bad neighborhood. I always worked till around 11 PM, and I had to cross a fairly busy street to get to the bus stop. The bus stop isn't the most well lit, and the buses have been known to pass people because they couldn't see them standing there. So I was waiting for the bus to pull over when this white minivan pulls up in front of me. The driver rolled down his window and asked how old I was. I just looked at him because why would I tell him my age? He was a random person. He began telling me that I should get in the van to go to church with him. I could see another person sitting in the dark back of the van. I couldn't really make him out all that well, but I could tell he was looking at me. The driver then began to insist that I get into the back of the van so he can save my soul. Right when he starts to open the door and I start easing back to run, the bus pulled up behind him, blowing its horn at him. He slammed his palms on the steering wheel and sped off as I ran to jump on the bus. I told the driver exactly what happened, and he dropped me off right in front of my house and waited till I ran inside.
The mysterious man with the baseball cap. This had happened a couple of years ago. My boyfriend and I were moving from Spain to England. We had rented our flat, which was unfurnished, and we needed to leave it in the same way. And since all of our furniture was, well, IKEA, we decided to put everything on sale for the internet. It was, well, cheaper and easier to sell quick and forget about it because we had a lot to organize. We realized how easy everything was selling, and we decided to get rid of our other stuff, like old electronics, video games, and other things you don't really want to pay to move overseas. Everything went peachy until we had almost sold everything, and that's when my boyfriend traveled to England for a couple of days in order to arrange a new home, and I stayed packing. The second day, my boyfriend was away, and he texted me that someone had answered one of our listings of an old Apple keyboard and mouse and was coming that afternoon. They arranged for £20 for the loot, and I would, well, meet the guy and collect the money. Now, we lived in a nice big compound with porters next to the public park and children's playground. It was a summer, and the building had a swimming pool, and it was open to really almost anyone, and lots of families were around all day and every day. We thought it was safe to meet in the park at the entrance of the complex. We'd almost sold everything this way, and we did it the same with this person. The thing is, the guy didn't come across at the time and at the place we arranged. I waited for almost 15 minutes, and seeing he wouldn't show, I went back upstairs and kept packing. I texted my boyfriend about it, and he told me to forget about it. It was only £20 anyway, and we had other things to think about. We were both quite stressed with the whole ordeal of moving overseas. Things weren't, well, getting smoother. They were mostly getting rougher for the most part. And we almost thought that losing the new house, we were going to be homeless. The next day, my boyfriend texts me again and apologizes, saying that the guy apparently had a sick daughter and he couldn't make it, and totally forgot to cancel. But he's still interested, and we can do it at the same time today. My boyfriend asks me if I'm going to be home, and I just tell him yes, and ask him to give him the flat number so he can just ring and I don't have to wait for him again under the August burning sun, in case if he doesn't show up again. The time we were supposed to meet comes up and nobody rings. I keep packing, cleaning, and at some point I decide to take a break and sit for a while with my laptop. And when I'm there, the house grows quiet. I hear a familiar sound of a key scratching the lock. Just a millisecond before someone unlocks it and enters, and for a moment I assume it's my boyfriend coming home, but I immediately dismiss the idea because he's out of the country. I listen carefully to try to locate the sound. To my surprise, I hear it again. It's very subtle, and doesn't sound like the last one. And it definitely doesn't sound like the front door lock, and this startles me. But it's the middle of the day, and the building is very safe. And I think maybe it's the neighbor's dog or one of the kids playing on the landing. I then approach the door quietly. I didn't want my neighbors thinking I'm prying or trying to freaking peek on their children through some little peephole. I see a man in the landing. He's facing the lift and giving me his back. He seemed to be middle-aged, fit, and wearing a baseball cap. I couldn't really see his face. There are 2 other flats on this floor, and both are occupied by families. This is not the dad of any of those families. I don't know this guy, but then again, he could be a relative or a friend, and he's only waiting for the lift. The lift door opens and he leaves. I keep doing this, and for the rest of the day until it gets dark, and I can put the rubbish out. This is Spain in summer, and it's easily 10:30 p.m. before it's completely dark. I collect the bags and head downstairs. I need to get out of the building complex and across the park to where I'm throwing the bags in the bin, and I think I hear a whistle, but there's no one around. I head back, and now you definitely hear a whistle. This time being more accurate. Someone's whistling, not a song per se, or a sexy phew phew, just some notes, like calling out a dog, but so lively, somehow slower, kind of eerily. I instinctively look around, but once again, it being night, I see no one. The park is empty, and so is the playground. Everything is lit except for a tree area in the back. And it's probably my imagination, but I just get this feeling like I'm being watched. I try to keep it cool, but at this point, I'm a bit jumpy. I think I have been home alone for the past couple days, and I'm tired. I'm just maybe imagining stuff. I get upstairs, lock the front door, and somehow, I'm not connecting the dots. A while later, I'm in bed, watching something on my laptop, texting, when the buzzer to the downstairs rings. I look to the computer desk. It's 11:30 p.m. I'm definitely not expecting anyone. The buzzer has a camera that automatically sends a signal to the flat when it rings. It's always a bit slow, so you need to wait a couple of seconds until the image comes up and through, and when it does, I see a guy in a baseball cap. And that's when I could connect the dots. The missing meetings, the scratching, the whistling. But I say to myself that maybe I'm just paranoid, so I text my boyfriend and ask him or not if the guy's changed the time and has forgotten to tell me. He tells me that the dude just called him, but he didn't answer because, well, he's abroad and he didn't want to pay any roaming costs or long-distance costs to speak to this weird guy after being stood up twice. At that point, it would not have been worth the 20 pounds he was going to be giving me. I tell him someone's here, and he texts the guy. He tells my boyfriend that he's here, and no one's answering. He's angry. I'm seeing him in a small black and white screen, speaking on his phone and gesturing. I don't see his face, but I'm going to lose him any minute because the signal only lasts a couple of minutes if you don't open. My boyfriend texts me not to open and that he's calling the guy, so I calls the man, and instead of yelling at him for coming at this time unannounced, he still doesn't know about the other events. He apologizes to him and explains that I'm having friends over and I must have disconnected the buzzer. We don't want him to know that I'm home alone, but we don't want him to think that there is no one home either. The stranger asks if he can have my number, and my boyfriend, in all of his cold blood, says, "Sure, but she's not answering. I just called her twice and she must be distracted with her friends," which was completely untrue. And then asks the guy, please don't make any noise or make any sort of port or call to the police. We'll be in trouble. We've had complaints for the noise before, a blatant lie, but the mention to the police seemed to convince him. My boyfriend apologizes to him again to keep him calm and asks him to please come tomorrow, that he will be there and they can close the deal in person. I can't see him in the camera anymore, but I look through the window and I see him go away across the park and disappear around a corner. We never heard from him again. My boyfriend returned home the next morning, and in a few days we moved abroad. I still don't know what were his intentions, and I don't know if it really was him whistling to me from the darkness, but I knew he definitely had been in my floor because I saw him through the peephole. He was there, inside the complex, inside the building, just on the other side of my door, and he didn't fucking ring. And I know if I had been just a sketchy looking person trying to get a cheap keyboard, he would have rung. So, mysterious man in the baseball cap, I implore you, please, let's not meet again.
Skin Me Alive by Elizabeth Dem. I should start this post out by saying that I'm a nursing student, and I was completing a rotation on a psych ward at this time. One thing to know about psych patients, certain behaviors are normal for them, and certain behaviors are not. For example, depressed patients can have thoughts of suicide every day, and that would be considered their normal. Obviously still concerning and treated as such. But if they suddenly started having thoughts of homicide, that would be very concerning because it's a dramatic change in their behaviors. Back to the story. Psych wards require frequent check-ins on their patients because who knows what they're up to in their rooms alone. They can be quite crafty and you must stay on top of them. So towards the end of the shift, I was doing my final check on a patient. It was 11 p.m. I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck, So I whipped around and noticed a super creepy figure in the door, separating my patient's room and the room next door, sort of like a hotel room door. She was not there when I entered the room. It was also pitch black at this time. So I shone my flashlight on the figure. It was a patient from a room down the hall, who was just wandering around. Figuring she was hallucinating or confused, I offered to walk her back to her room and help her get comfortable. As I was walking down the hall with the patient, we paused in front of the nursing station, which was dimly lit, as I was going to ask her nurse if she could have some sort of sleep aid. The patient turned to me and said, "You have the most beautiful skin. I would love to skin you alive and wear it." Maintaining my professional nature, but scared shitless in my head, I said something along the lines of, "Now we're not gonna do that. We're gonna get you to bed." As soon as I got her in bed and her sleep aid was given, I turned the shutter lights out, and just before the room went black, she gave me the most creepy and sinister smile I had ever seen, and had a look of pure evil in her eyes. I quickly shut the door and booked it back to the nursing station after that, and reported what she said to me to one of the most intimidating male nurses I've ever seen, who promptly called her doctor to be evaluated because this sort of behavior was very unusual for her and not in her nature, which makes this 100 times more creepy. So, psych patient who suddenly took an interest in my skin, let's never meet again.
You can't fight a predator with niceness. I was raised in a very religious family. It was made clear to me from the start that I was to study theology in order to trap a suitable mate, or marry and reproduce and live the life of a wife and mother, and that was to be my destiny. I was fine with that until I hit my teens and I started to question most of what I was told. This was in the long run, which led up to this, or what I like to refer to as the Great Family Breakdown of the 2000s. I was 18, and I had my mind set on not studying theology, spend a year backpacking and working in interesting places, and eventually come back home and become a vet, possibly never marry or have kids. This, of course, resulted in first my father, then my entire family disowning me. Well, mostly because of not reading theology a bit, but you get the general circumstances under which I grew up in. So naturally, I picked up smoking out of pure spite, and the rebellion streak really appealed to the teenage me. Okay, so in the spring of 2000, I set out on my first adventure. I had a very undetailed plan to travel through Italy, France, see the romantic and historical places, and then continue to England and, well, sip on a overly priced, but very, I assume, sophisticated plastic cup of coffee while enjoying the slow turning of the London Eye. The plan was to get jobs along the way. It seemed so easy in all the movies I had seen. Since breaking free of my overly religious family, I tried to sum it up. I was a very naive 18-year-old girl with no life experience. In June, I arrived in Italy, and I had almost no money left, and did what came natural to me in times of need. I turned to the closest church. It was a beautiful day, a beautiful church, and I enjoyed the chilly air inside the stone walls when I became aware that I was being watched. I turned and I saw a very nice-looking man in his late 20s smiling gently at me, asking me something in Italian. His English was almost as bad as my Italian, but we managed to introduce ourselves as Gabriella and Francisco. Francisco, it turned out, was some sort of volunteer keeping the church and its surroundings tidy. He invited me to a garden barbecue that evening with people from the church choir, and it was a powerful, wonderful experience. Soon I had a job helping a gardener and a life that was simply wonderful. The people were welcoming and sweet, and I started to learn a little Italian. It was like one of those movies, but some days, when I went into the church in the late afternoon to light a candle and admire some great works, I could feel Francisco watching me in a way that I was not entirely comfortable with. But what made him go from charming to slightly unnerving was how he held one hand on the back of my neck when we walked out of the church that first afternoon. Something made me feel very uneasy in my admittedly limited experience. You hold another person's hand, you rest on their arm, possibly even on the small of their back, but the back of the neck? It felt strange and I disliked it right away, but I disregarded my first impression with the fact that I did not know their customs. Then I got used to it, thinking it was just in his way. He was trying to be polite, even shy in our awkward conversations, avoiding direct eye contact and keeping his distance whenever anyone else was there. But when in company, he became almost invisible, shrinking into himself. It was strange to see what I thought maybe be some sort of social phobia. Perhaps he'd been given a job because he had some sort of invisible handicap that made it hard for him to function in a social setting. When others would be around, he'd become someone else, more introverted, more elusive. Weeks went by and he started to hang out close to where I worked, but he was often close by when I took my evening walks, and I started to, get that lingering feeling that something was not right with him, but I didn't fear him. And I didn't want to seem rude. When I had let several days pass without returning to the church, he came to the house where I rented a home and asked for me, and wondered if perhaps I was ill, since I had not turned up for our evening walks. In retrospect, this should have made me pack my bags and get on the bus, but remember, I was a very naive person at the time, so instead, he held out a hand and invited me for a walk. I took it, ignoring the feeling of danger that started to brew somewhere deep inside of my chest. We walked past the place where the bus usually stops, and where I usually turn around to walk home, because there's nothing more to see down that road. As soon as we were away from the busier street, his hand let go of mine and he placed it instead on the back of my neck, mumbling Italian's words at a pace that I could not follow or comprehend. I tried being polite and nice and turning into the friendly nice girl that I was, brought up to be, but it had no effect, and it didn't ease his iron grip or slow him down, and soon we were on a lonely street, and I remember it led into a closed dairy factory. You would have thought that my instincts would kick in now, right? I wish. I thought that I could cure his sudden aggressive behavior with a friendly, polite manner and charm. I knew it sounds almost insane now thinking about it, how I just let this happen, but remember, I was trained from toddlerhood to be a nice girl and to not fuss, not raise my voice. I found my voice that day. It took some time, I admit, but when I found myself backed up against a concrete wall in a dark, empty factory house and saw the hostile look in his eyes as he pulled out a small knife in his pocket, I completely flipped. I screamed, I scratched, I kicked, I clawed, and it was the kind of knife that you would see for using opening boxes, small and thin, possibly dangerous enough nonetheless. He was so shocked by the sudden violent flip, he dropped it and I took my chance to run. I didn't care where I ran, I just ran like a crazy animal while screaming unarticulated nonsense and cuss words. I lost both my sandals, but I kept running. I didn't even look over my shoulder to see if I was even being chased, I just ran. I reached the first house in the street and threw myself at the door, knocking and kicking and shouting until it opened up to a young mom, the teacher in the village, and she let me in. I didn't report it to the police. I left the next day on the first bus, but I regret that decision today. At the time, I was too embarrassed and too ashamed to talk to the police, and it would take time to get a translator to do it properly anyway. I just wanted to go. It was a very frightening experience, but I did learn something fundamentally important. If needed, never hesitate to fight with everything you got. You can't make a predator go away with niceness and being polite. So, crazy, introverted church person, let's not meet again.